These were the biggest Japanese planes when they appeared, and a showcase of the very best in the country's flying boat building experience. But as time passed during World War II, their shortcomings and vulnerabilities became more and more apparent. Still, they served until the end of the war in various roles. They were the Kawanishi H6K flying boats. So let's see the history of these aircraft today. These big flying boats were used by the Japanese Navy on the Pacific during the first part of the war, but when they encountered the newer heavily armed American fighters and patrol bombers, they proved to be an easy target for the Allied gunners. The American crews were very surprised to see how these giant planes burst into flames after just a few hits and plunged into the ocean. As it turned out, chasing performance and long range made these flying boats too fragile for heavy combat use. So let's go back in time and see how and why they were created this way. Their history actually started more than a decade before World War II, when the Kawanishi company started to build its expertise with flying boats. Before World War II, the planned Japanese expansion on the Pacific raised the question of long-range reconnaissance and bomber aircraft as a requirement to fight a war on the vast ocean. Since the land-based aircraft would have needed airfields built on almost every island, the flying boats were a logical choice for these roles. The Kawanishi Aircraft Company built several planes for the military in the 1920s, and they were tasked in 1929 to acquire a new advanced flying boat. This led to Kawanishi's team visiting the United Kingdom, looking for a suitable aircraft at the Short Brothers Company. Their visit led to the purchase of the right to build a modified version of the Short Rangoon flying boat under license. This type, now built in Japan, became the Kawanishi H6K and was accepted into service in 1932. But in the same year, lots of changes happened in the Navy administration, and the new leadership set out to raise the quality of the Navy aircraft and also replace the license-built planes with pure Japanese designs. As the most experienced Japanese company building flying boats, Kawanishi received specifications for a new experimental flying boat in 1933. They worked out two designs for these requirements: the 4-engined Type Q and the 3-engined Type R flying boats. But after the Navy examination, none of these designs advanced further than scaled model testing. In the next year, however, the Navy issued exclusive requirements to Kawanishi for the so-called X9 project, a big 4-engined monoplane flying boat. As it usually happened with Japanese requirements of the time, these new specifications were extremely ambitious. The new design had to be able to outperform all the Western designs in production at the time. Or to put it simply, it had to be the best of the world. They asked for at least 220 km/h cruise speed and more than 4,500 km range, with powerful armament and ability to carry torpedoes and bombs. Using the experience they gathered with flying boats, the Kawanishi company presented their new so-called Type S design to these 1934 requirements. The new aircraft, designed under the lead of Yoshio Hachiguchi and Shizuo Kikuhara, was a big monoplane with a twin tail, and it was powered by 4 Nakajima Hikari 2 air-cooled radial engines. To achieve the required speed and range, the design featured the largest wingspan on seaplanes up to that date, with 40 meters. And it was not just the biggest Japanese flying boat, but the biggest Japanese aircraft of its time. On the other hand, because the designers had to balance between the extremely ambitious requirements and the relatively underpowered engines available, similarly to many other contemporary Japanese aircraft, it completely lacked armor plating and fuel tank protection. The new design in its elegant lines was very reminiscent to the Dornier DO-18 and DO-24 types. If you're interested in the history of those German flying boats, check out my earlier video covering those types. The first prototype of the Kawanishi design was finished in summer 1936 and made its maiden flight on 14th of July without any big problems, and only slight modifications to the hull were required for better handling of water. After the initial test flights, the prototype was handed over to the Navy for evaluation at the end of the month. Though the type fulfilled the Navy's requirements, they found it slightly underpowered with the original 840 horsepower engines. The second and third prototypes were delivered during 1937, and the fourth one in 1938. During the testing, several small modifications were made to the type, mainly on the control surfaces, And to fix the lack of power, during 1937 the original engines were replaced with 1000 horsepower Mitsubishi Kinsei 43 types, raising the total power from 3360 horsepower to 4000. The type with the new modifications was accepted by the Navy in January 1938 as H6K1 Navy Type 97 Flying Boat Model 1, and it was ordered into full production with a contract for 200 units. The armament for the type was planned to be 3 7.7mm machine guns, one in the nose, one in the tail, and one in the dorsal turret, and the plane had the capability to carry either 2 torpedoes or 1000 kg bombs under the wings. But as with many other Japanese military planes, the designers' efforts to comply with the requirements resulted in a very vulnerable design, hurting the performance of these planes on the long run, even though many modifications were made to the type during production. So let's take a look at those next. The initial prototypes were the H6K1 variants tested by the Navy. The first 10 production models featuring armament and the stronger 1000 horsepower engines received the designation H6K2, and 2 of these models were modified to personnel transport as H6K3 models. During production, further modifications were applied to the type. The fuel capacity was increased, the dorsal turret was deleted, and 2 waist gunner positions were added instead, and the machine gun in the tail was replaced with a 20mm cannon. These updated variants received the H6K4 designation and were the most numerous variant of the type, with more than 120 units built. In 1942, a further upgraded variant of the type, the H6K5 appeared, which featured new 1300 horsepower Kinsei 53 engines, and a machine gun turret was installed behind the cockpit. 36 units were built from this variant. There were also transport variants built without armament. 14 units of the H6K2L unarmed transport variants were made, and a further 20 units based on the H6K4 were built without armament, under the designation H6K4L. In total, between 1936 and 1943, 215 units were built, including the prototypes. The Kawanishi H6K4 model was 25.63 meters long, with a wingspan of 40 meters. It had an empty weight of 11,707 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 21,500 kilograms. The plane was powered by 4 Mitsubishi Kinsei 43 air-cooled radial engines, each of them producing 1000 horsepower. With these engines, the big flying boat was able to reach a top speed of 340 km an hour and a cruise speed of 222 km an hour. It had a service ceiling of 9,600 meters and a combat range of 4,800 kilometers, with a ferry range of more than 6,000 kilometers. The plane's defensive armament consisted of 3 7.7mm machine guns, 1 in the nose and 2 in the waist gunner positions, and a 20mm cannon in the tail. The secondary armament consisted of either 2 torpedoes or 1000 kilograms of bombs. The Kawanishi H6K entered service in 1938, and their first combat actions took place in the Sino-Japanese War. When the War on the Pacific broke out, 66 of these flying boats were in service with the Japanese Navy, and they proved to be very useful with their more than 4,000 km range for conducting long-range reconnaissance or attack missions. They participated in the attacks against Baker Island and Wake Island. They also bombed a Dutch seaplane base at Heron, and they also attacked Rabaul. But very soon these combat missions highlighted the weakness of the aircraft. Though their excellent range was very useful in the reconnaissance role, they were vulnerable when attacking enemy installations. The unprotected, big and slow aircraft was an easy target for ground fire and Allied fighters. Soon the type was withdrawn from direct combat missions, and they were assigned to reconnaissance roles. By the end of 1941, a new, more advanced flying boat, the Kawanishi H6K, was already in the works, which featured more protection and defensive armament. While preparations were made for the production of the new type, the H6K was further improved with the H6K5 variant, which, thanks to its 1,300 horsepower engines, now could reach a top speed of 390 km an hour. But only 36 were built from this variant, as in 1942 the production lines were shifted to the new H8K model. In the later phases of the war, the H6K flew less and less reconnaissance missions, as they were slowly replaced by newer types, and their main use was to fly cargo missions. But despite the more advanced H8K Emily entering service, the old Mavis served all the way to the end of the war, though only 12 of them remained in service by that time. Though the Kawanishi H6K quickly showed its weakness during World War II, but it was an excellent showcase of the pre-war Japanese plane building expertise, and it was the biggest aircraft in Japan when it appeared. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.